Hey.
There we go. Hello, happy January, everyone. 2023. I can't believe this is the first webinar of the year. I already feel like it's January. We're like in May. Like it's been like a really big month. I don't know. I can't speak for the two of you, but it feels like it's been 2023 for a while now. I'm so excited to have everybody here today and to kick off this year with such an important topic on confidence building. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Meagan Strout, and I'm the CEO of Tack Advisors. And today I am joined by Shelley Trask and Taylor Allison, who are two coaches here at Tack Advisors, both former executive assistants, and Shelley's a current executive assistant. They've had a ton of success in their careers supporting, high-profile organizations, and have been, really in the past couple of years done a lot for our community in tech, helping people both technically and in soft skills. And a huge part of that has been around confidence building. So we're excited to share this topic with you today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I just want to make sure everybody knows that we can't see or hear you, but we certainly would love to hear and see your feedback. And so if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll be monitoring it throughout this session so we can make sure that we touch on any of your questions. So without any further ado, Shelley and Taylor, I'd love to sort of start by how did we come up with this topic? And why are we talking about confidence building today? Because it's funny, as I'm thinking back in 2022, at different times, all three of us have talked individually about this recurring theme of confidence, especially when it comes to the administrative role. And so I'm curious to hear from you about what you've seen, especially on the coaching side when it comes to confidence.
Yeah, if you don't, I'll go first. I feel like I'm going to ruin the spoiler here, but the thing about confidence, in my opinion, is it continues to come up when people are working on their lack of proactivity. And I truly believe if we could take away one thing, like a lack of proactivity, a lack of being able to see around corners, be good at their job and grow, comes from a lack of confidence, because you don't have confidence in yourself. You don't have confidence in your own opinions, your decision making. You are not able to push back, ask more questions. You're not able to speak up. All of this leads to proactivity and other things, many other things, right? But proactivity has been a huge theme too, which is how people come to me in coaching sessions and say, I need to be more proactive. How do I get more proactive? And of course, confidence, I think, is one of the roots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Taylor? What have you seen?
I completely agree. I think confidence is enigmatic because it affects everything, and you can't really nail it. Just because you're confident at one thing doesn't mean you're confident at something else. I think that it's something that's constantly evolving. It evolves when you try new things, when you do the same things that you're used to doing, when you interact with new people in jobs. So I think that it's an overarching theme. Absolutely. When I work with anyone, completely, it doesn't depend on what type of role anyone is working, and everyone, I guess, anyone in any position, everyone is working on their confidence, because you need it to interact in most settings that you're existing in on a daily basis, in work and in personal life.
I agree. I know for me, my confidence has waxed and waned all over my career, and I've had quite a few different roles, and especially in the past 3 years, moving into this position of founding this company and becoming a leader and coaching and mentoring others. That's something that was a muscle I hadn't exercised for a really long time, and I've never been a founder before. And I'll say that a big part of helping me grow my confidence in this job has even been just working with the two of you, because I'm always talking to both of you and asking for feedback and staying dialed in. And, that's been a big part, I think, of helping me with my confidence grow. So I'm curious to know from you, since you are actively coaching a lot of people in our network, what have you seen be sort of the pitfalls or the things that can happen when people are lacking confidence? How can that potentially hold you back in your career, or, prevent your, professional growth?
Do you want me to I can keep going first?
Yeah, go ahead, Shelley.
Absolutely.
So I think confidence is the root of human behavior. So a lack of confidence is a lack of trust in yourself and your own inner voice. It's literally the little tiny person inside of you who's driving the big body, like in a Pixar movie. that trust goes really deep into your instinct, into trusting your gut, your intuition. And that's like, it shows up as, knowing what to say or how to set your own personal boundaries as well in your personal life and at work. It's how to ask for help. It can really creep into every aspect of your life if you lack confidence. And it can show up like not feeling like your opinions are important. So you're not speaking up, you're not asking for projects. This can lead to like other people assuming that you don't know what you're doing, or you don't have anything to say, or you're not knowledgeable about a topic. And that can lead to them not even offering you opportunities. So this can cost you money, this can cost you projects, experiences, and it can really limit your life, and it can limit your career trajectory. It's this little tiny thing that can kind of snowball and grow if you let it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that with confidence in a workplace, like you just mentioned, boundaries is incredibly important, because oftentimes, especially in administrative roles, we have a hard time saying no to something, or that's too much, or I'm overwhelmed, because we can't set boundaries, because we don't have confidence. And we think that if I say no, someone is going to think that I'm not good at what I do, or I'm not capable. And I think it's really important. If you have confidence, then you only have a finite amount of time. So what are your priorities? And based on those priorities, that's how you dictate your time. And I think that when you're taking on a bunch of different things because you don't feel comfortable, you don't have enough confidence in your own time management, in how your time should be spent, I think that's a huge issue that I see constantly as I'm coaching with people on how they're able to set those boundaries, because they feel confident in, nope, I know how to do what I do well. I just need the ability to do it. And I think that lack of confidence also comes into how you assert yourself, how you speak about also what you do. Do you take credit for the things that you did, in a humble way, of course, but in a way that's not passing off credit to, oh, well, I did that, but they did most of it. Or because I think I think it's something that we do as women. I think it's something that we do in work that we're used to doing. But it's important to set that confidence and say, thank you. I did spend some time on that, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Like, that's a very specific way to assert confidence, right? And then, like Shelley said, that gives you an ability for people to say, oh, they did that well, or they seem like they enjoyed that, or they succeeded in it. Perfect. I can give them something that looks similar, or they can handle more. And that's how you grow.
I think you hit on a couple of interesting points, such as the first of like knowing when to acknowledge it and saying thank you. I see so many people, and even in our personal lives, and it was something I think I was sort of learned or were groomed really young of, like, when you do something and you do something well, don't like detract it and be like, oh no, like acknowledge and say, thank you for this feedback. Like, I appreciate you acknowledging that to me, right? And so like owning that is, I think, a really big piece. Another thing I think you mentioned that is interesting is around like the saying no piece, because I think, and this goes for, again, anybody in any position, I just see it a lot in the administrative role, like that not wanting to say no piece, because we're helpers and we're doers and we're givers by nature. That's really hard. But then also on the flip side of that, as administrative professionals, having the confidence of pushing back sometimes when you do say no, and like when is the appropriate time to like raise your hand, ask for help, delegate. And so I think you mentioned, one thing about like knowing about what your strengths are and knowing about like what your capacity is, and like to a certain extent, like what's in your lane and what isn't in your lane. Because I think that if you have a really great manager or mentor or coach that helps you get comfortable living in this gray and like, swimming sometimes outside of your swim lanes, that's really great, because that's where a lot of growth comes from. But also, like, you have to do it, I think, in a really sort of thoughtful or like conservative way. Like, we use the term, like, you got to go slow to go fast. And so like not taking on so much, because when you take on too much too fast, like then you're ultimately going to fail, and that's going to hit your confidence. But if you take on like, incrementally more and say yes to things in a reasonable and incremental way, that's a good way to build confidence. I hope that made sense. I feel like I like went around in a circle there for a second.
No, and I think you're exactly right. And a very tangible way to understand where to say no and when to say no when you're not sure is, are you overwhelmed by what
Mhm.
you're doing to the
Mhm.
point where your true priorities can't be handled well because you're spread too thin? Because there's nothing worse. I promise you, there, from a managerial perspective, there is nothing worse than somebody saying, yes, 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 and then doing everything at 60%. I would so much rather someone do everything, do 6 things well and say those other 4 things I can't do right now, versus, so that's when you're not sure, you should ask yourself, wait a minute, am I doing my true job responsibilities well? Or am I spread too thin? And that's when I have to get rid of things. And to add on to that, I love to tell my clients, don't be excellent at things that you don't like to do either.
Yes. Yes.
That's so, I think that we think like, oh, let's take this on, this on, this on. But it's, if you absolutely hate math, we were just talking about
Yeah.
this,
We were
right?
just
Math,
talking about that.
accounting. Yeah.
Hate math.
Like, don't focus 60% of your time doing something that you don't like doing, because guess what? People are going to ask you to do it again. They're going to ask you to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So that's something to, not to do it poorly, but just don't focus your time on, if you have 10 things to do, then try to focus on the 8 things you like doing, not the 2 things that you're not as good at. Because like you said, then when you fail at it or waste a lot of time on it, it's really deflating.
Now, there's
Yeah,
nothing that's more of a cost confidence like crusher than like trying to do something that you like hate and are terrible at. Like,
yeah, I was joking that like no one is confident about everything, right? I don't wake up and I'm amazing looking and I slept so well and everyone around me thinks I'm the best and my math is fantastic and I write the best essays. And you have to find out, like, you build your confidence by finding out what little things you're good at and building those together, right? And like Taylor said, I am not good at math. I actually used to manage multi-million-dollar contracts though. We'll get into like how you fake it till you make it too. I think we should talk about that.
Totally.
I never messed up a contract, really good at it, but really bad at math. So I use a calculator, fun fact, use your tooling. But it's important to recognize, like, it's okay that I stink at math. It's okay that I used to cry over the multiplication tables at my parents' dinner table, like every night. I just couldn't do it. I probably have a learning disorder that I never identified, but it was really hard. And meanwhile, I'm like painting portraits, and I'm very good at other things that are not math. And so you have to find your self-worth and your value and your confidence building from the things you're good at and identifying those things.
I
and
love
there's
that
an equilibrium of time too, that like, how much time do you spend on something that takes more work because you don't like it? It's not necessarily in your wheelhouse of skills, because if you can get a bunch of things that are you either enjoy or you feel neutral about done in 2 hours, but it takes you 2 hours to do a different project that you get done mediocrely well because of the aforementioned reasons, right? Like, it's not a great use of time. And that's what's important too in being efficient.
Yeah. I kind of laugh a little bit about you talking about crying at like your times table, Shelley, because I was in a role as a manager back in the day when I worked at Four Seasons, and I had to go to labor meeting where I had to sit and like crunch numbers and talk about like payroll. And that was like a fairly large part of my, like, I spent a lot of time in spreadsheets and analyzing numbers. And like, for sure, every week I left that meeting in tears. Like, it was awful. And so now I joke and I'm, and I talk to candidates about this same thing, especially when I'm like talking to them about like weaknesses. And when we talk about math, I'm like, the kind of typically beautiful thing about being an administrative professional is like, maybe 5% of your job has to do with like calculating numbers. Same thing with me, even on this side. Like, I have a bookkeeper, I have an accountant. Once every 2 weeks, I have to like actually look and crunch like numbers, but like it's less than 5% of my job. And so I encourage everybody who like is in their role, regardless of role, whether you're in an administrative role or something else, if there's something you like really don't enjoy or you don't do well, and like it's just a weakness that's never, like, math's just never going to be better. Just like I'm never going to be a good basketball player. Like I'm not an athlete. Like, it's, like there's certain things I identify and like, I'm totally fine with that. And so acknowledging that and making sure that that's like less than like 5 to 10% of your job, and then it's fine. But if there's like a huge, like you said, of that equilibrium, like if a big part of your job is stuff you are not good at and you do not enjoy, like there's nothing like that is going to just absolutely squash your confidence.
Absolutely. And like it's funny because when you guys were both talking about the two things, I can think of my project like that. And it was private planes, managing the hours between maintenance and actual like flight times. And I mean, it was so confusing. I don't know anything about like private planes. I don't know anything about pilots. Like I have no idea how to, and it took me, I remember doing this hours, but what's interesting is we can all immediately, without any prep on this, think of projects like that, projects we didn't succeed at, that we didn't enjoy doing, that took a ton of time. And so everyone, when you're doing this, when you're reevaluating your responsibilities, identify what those projects are, then identify what do they have in common. Was it that it was a project versus a task? Was it monotonous? Was it in a spreadsheet and you prefer, a visual or written format? Like think about those things, because it doesn't have to be something as specific as like general math and accounting, but it could be, but it can be. But I think when you're trying to identify for you what that is, think about all of the things that you don't like and then find what those commonalities are. That's going to be easier to then decide going forward too, and taking projects. That has 8 of the 10 things I don't like doing. That's not for me.
It's so funny you said that, Taylor, because I just said I hate math, but if you saw my budget spreadsheet and the way I track my own personal finances, it would blow your mind. So you can both hate math and hate the idea of something, but find the value and the piece of it, like you just said, that benefits you. And so tracking my budget, when I was very poor, I had to track every penny, right? And it was like, ooh, got to make rent, got to not pay for a cup of tea at the restaurant. And that it's still a skill that you build, whether or not you realize you're doing math, but you're doing it to benefit you.
And I think too, like, we're not encouraging you to not try new things or things you don't think you would like. It's just once you try something, identifying, is this in the stay basket or the go basket kind of thing? And then also, like you said, building the skill set behind it to understand, okay, like everyone, we all have things that we have to do that we don't like doing. So then how do you manage that and give yourself, I think the part of the confidence that ties back in here a lot is giving yourself the grace to try it, to do it, to fail at it, and to feel like, well, I'm good at these things, but that's not like it, you can let it roll off your back. That's not one of the things I'm good at. Okay, next, it's like you do with anything in life. Kind of, you try a new food, you don't like it, you don't eat it again.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing. And it kind of talks about like having that fixed versus growth mindset of, I think so many people like get nervous about trying something new because they've never done it before. And so we were all just sort of talking about like, and you said it was Tony Robbins. I don't know where I saw it. I think it was like on LinkedIn, but so many people will like not write, like they won't write a blog or they won't write something down because they're like, I don't even know what to start talking about. And so this meme or whatever it is that I saw was like, just start writing anything down and then you can clean up and edit later. Right. And so many people won't even try to do something new or try to do something like that's a stretch project for them because they haven't tried it before. And it's like, give yourself that grace to make mistakes or iterate on things, like give it, say like this first time, it's probably not going to be perfect, but I'm going to learn stuff from it so that the next time I do it, it's going to be better. And I've seen that like, and Shelley mentioned this too, like so many people who are really, really successful, especially in the administrative role, are people who, are just getting into the position that are so hungry to learn and try something new that, like I said, they don't necessarily see swim lanes. They're like, if they have the bandwidth, they start doing what they know how to do well, and then they like ask to take on more projects, or they, take a class to learn something new to see if they can implement it in their job. And I think that that's a really big, important thing to like acknowledge as well.
It is. And I think that's about beginner's mindset too, is something that they also call it with like growth versus fixed. But a beginner, a child, right, like falls on the ground and they're not like, oh, I can't walk yet, I'm never going to walk again, I fell, like I'm sitting on the ground forever. They get back up, they try it with this curiosity. And I think it's approaching things, it's changing your mindset of approaching things that you may not know how to do with the confidence that, okay, I wouldn't be in this job if people didn't think I could do it. I wouldn't have been hired for this job. I have a seat at the table, so I'm going to try to do this, and I'm going to try it my way. I'm going to be curious about learning it. And then, I'm going to adapt it. And like you said, iterate on it until it gets to a place where I feel comfortable sharing it or implementing it or whatever it is. Because curiosity is how inventions and electricity and everything's happened forever. So looking at a project in a way of like, and you can too. It doesn't have to be done the way that someone's telling you it has to be done, because everyone's mind doesn't think the same. So even if the end result is the same, you can approach it in a way that's much more stylistically your own. And understanding that is a big piece of this confidence. And then saying, this is how I'm going to implement it.
I have two things to add. Number one, a great book to read if you're interested in changing your habits and kind of working on, I'll use my example, like as a kid, I never liked journaling because I didn't like my handwriting. So I'd buy a beautiful journal. I would write one page and then I would rip the page out because I was like, oh, I didn't do it right. We were talking a little bit about this earlier, but I identify with that. Atomic Habits is such a great book by Adam Grant. It's been out for a long time now. He probably has more books, but really good book to read about that. And how to set small goals to make them realistic, right?
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And I forget the second point that I had. But
that's I like what you said about setting these small goals, these like micro habits or these micro goals, because that's going to help you build confidence, is like incrementally like seeing a little bit of success. You don't need to have like a huge success, take on something really big you've never done before. Like it's little things, it's little projects. It's, like for us here at Tack, like Alexa, who is my executive business partner, like I've pushed her to really lean in and do more stuff with marketing. And I remember a couple months ago, I'm like, I really want to start like doing reels and like reposting like snapshots of these webinars or trainings that we do. And she had never edited videos before. And I saw her like kind of initially freeze up a little bit when I initially asked. I could tell like she was like a little uncomfortable with this idea because it's something she had never done before. But I'm like, you have a Mac. I'm like, I know there's video editing stuff on Mac. Like, I have no idea how to do it. Research it. Like, see if you can try. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. Just like try making like some videos and let's see what it looks like, and we'll go from there. And I think like just pushing somebody sometimes too to try things they haven't done before, I think is really, really important. And it's not like a huge project. Like it's one video edit, right? But like now she's actually gotten incredibly good at it. She's fixed a lot of stuff for us, which is really nice. And so I think that's helped build her confidence to take on even bigger projects.
And I think what you're talking about is building that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And the foundation is so important because you don't just all of a sudden, like one day, walk in and you're like, I'm the most confident person here. No, you start with these small, like Shelley said too, the atomic habits, like the small goals, but also it's crucial that you acknowledge and celebrate those successes.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you look at something and how you did it, oftentimes we hit a goal and we're like, okay, what's next? Especially as like a type A go-getter type of person, you're like, on to the next. No. When you do something and you do it well, someone compliments you on it, or you present it and you're nervous about presenting it and it goes really well, whatever it is, you have to stop and you have to say like, I did that. 3 weeks ago, I had no idea what I was doing. I just did something big and I presented it to my executive, to our CEO, to whatever it was. And like, I feel really proud of myself. Great. And like, you have to acknowledge it because that's how you gain the confidence to build bigger things and you build that foundation. And it also makes it easier when then you do mess up on something, or, it's not as good as you wanted it to be, or you thought you could do. It's easier to let it roll off your back if you have this bank account of successes to look at and be like, okay, so that one wasn't great, but this, and this went well. So anyway, let's continue.
Yeah. And to add to that, you have that sensation, right? You're saying, I did it, I've completed it, like bask in it for a moment, but also like note how you're feeling at that moment. And it's almost like basketball players and goal setting. You close your eyes, you pretend you're making that basket. I do that before I do a presentation, before I do something like this. Long ago, I read this trick, right? Like before you do a job interview, you can raise your hands up high and kind of spread your legs in the Superman pose. And it naturally energizes you because your brain goes into that mode where you're just like, you're bigger, you're more powerful, you're ready to take this on. Those things really work. I tell everybody I coach, like before you go on video and you have to present something, or before you do something, my girlfriend is in the room often with me because we share an office, and she'll laugh at me so hard because before we do something, I just go, you love doing XYZ. You love presenting. You love explaining these things. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I am putting myself in the mindset where it's like, I'm already succeeding at the thing I'm about to do, even though I haven't done it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And like, listen to your favorite song. Like, like talk, there's so many ways you can decide what works for you, but like, listen to good music, move around, stand up like that, tell yourself, visualize, like you can decide what works for you. But all of these little things sound silly, but like, I actually love to journal, and I love to, like, before I do something like this, write like why I'm going to do it awesome. Why is it going to be the best? Because I am a great presenter, because I have confidence in myself, because I know the material and I'm prepped for it. Like, I think that however you do that, create something. And also, it's kind of like this Pavlov's dog type of thing that, like, as an example, every time I do yoga, I wear lemongrass oil and it's in my bag and it's ready to go. But when I smell it, it resets my senses to be like, I can drop in fast. Yeah, exactly. And I think that
Find your path. Like for me, this is getting me through January. The smell, it's amazing.
Exactly. But it's find what it is that helps you drop into that place of confidence faster. And it should be something that you can do in like less than 5 minutes, that you could do in your office bathroom, that you could do in your own apartment, that you could do privately, like in your car, whatever it is, find what that is so you can drop it.
Yeah, I love that. I used to tell candidates, I still do, but I used to tell candidates before they would go into an interview, like this was back in the days before people, like when people actually physically went into offices for interviews, they're like, that still happens, but it's a lot less common. I'd say like arrive, to the place like 15 minutes early and like put on Eye of the Tiger and like jog in place and just sort of like start like doing some punches, because it really does sort of hype you up and like gets like your blood flowing and like does get you excited. And so this kind of goes into like the next thing we're talking about is like, when it comes to confidence, like what are things you can control? Like things you can control is like being very prepped for it, like hyping yourself up, doing a Superman pose, listening to Eye of the Tiger. And like, what are things that you can't control? And with that being said, like how the things you can control, how can you help that build on your confidence?
So I cannot control other people. I can't control how you perceive me. I can't control how you feel about me. I can't control the 3-second judgment you make when you meet me. I can control the way I show up. I can control the time I show up to meet you and how that makes me look to you. I can control how I hold myself, how I smile, how I present information. I can control the fact that I've prepared all the information that I'm going to share with you, that I'm confident because I've prepared it and I've rehearsed it and I've maybe even practiced with a friend ahead of time. I can control all the things that come from me. And I have a lot of power in just knowing that I actually own my own destiny. And in the end, it's up to other people to perceive me in a certain way, but you will never be able to control other people, and you have to let that go. That's going to give you confidence too, focusing on yourself, your goals, your priorities, and truly like recognizing that everyone has their own inner struggles too. One thing that really helped me is I've supported so many C-level executives in my life, and I've micromanaged their lives, right? That's my job. And I'm certainly not speaking about my current boss, but sometimes you laugh because you see the things that you're so good at that they're so bad at. And no one is, like I said, no one is good at everything. If you were great at calendaring, you're probably not a CEO. So just recognize that you also have superpowers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that 2 things that you hit on that are, crucially important to the way I think about confidence are organization and prep make a huge difference. If you're running late, you feel flustered, your notes are half done, you're not totally sure on what the topic is, like you're going to not present well. You're going to show up and occasionally things happen. We have to fly by the seat of our pants, no big deal. But like every single day, I have a time block on my calendar. It's normally at the end of the day where I review things for the next day. I make sure that I am prepped to go. And that way, if there's someone that I know always cancels, I'm checking in with them that night, so that I'm not in a flurry the next day. I'm making sure that notes are ready to go, that I'm prepped. Are there any outstanding items that have to do with anything directly? And you can do that once a week for the whole week. You can do that once a day. I kind of do both. I start at the beginning of the week and look at what the week looks like, because things may change over the weekend. I start at the end of the day. Most days, just check in on the next day. At the end of the week, same thing. I have a little time block that like anything that needs to be followed up on for the week, because preparation is key to being organized and then feeling like, okay, we're talking about things you can control. You can control that. You can control your organization and your prep. You can't control if other people cancel last minute, but you can sometimes, we do this job, we're in this position because we are preemptive and we're looking forward. So that's really important. The second thing that I think is crucially, well, I'm gonna hit three. Second, like you mentioned, is body language. And like,
Yeah.
that's something else you can control. Do you feel good in your own body? Nobody feels great every single day. It's not about like, it's not necessarily truly about like your physical health or your mental health or your emotional health that day. It's, do you sit up straight? Can you roll your shoulders back? Do you look engaged? Are you nodding at people? Are you smiling? Are you actively listening on Zooms? I think it can be hard, but showing that you're, even like I'm doing right now, working with your hands. You guys can tell I'm passionate about this topic from that, right? So it's like doing small things to make sure that you are in control of your own body and the way that you present to other people. The last thing is speaking. This is such a big one, I think. And I know the 4 agreements really helped me with this one. That's a book if you've not heard of it, but speaking directly, things when you're speaking to someone and saying, I feel like, I think, I'm not sure, but all of that, it comes off as unsure. Keeping things concise and direct. I believe we need to do this for XYZ reasons. Like the more black and white you can make things when you're making a point, making a suggestion, the better that people are going to understand them. It leaves less room for communication error, but it also makes you look like you know what you're talking about and you feel like you should be talking about it.
Okay, I remember my other thing that I forgot earlier.
Yeah,
something cool that we say at Slack when you start at Slack, the company, is we used to be in person in these new hire classes. Now we're on Zoom, I'm assuming. And this amazing woman, Halima, who works in our onboarding, she will definitely say, everyone's feeling anxious. I'm sure they're all new. You're all onboarding. She says, you belong here. It's the one thing we say. You belong here. We hired you for a reason. Everyone has mixed feelings. They're all self-conscious. They're not sure how they got in the door. Slack's a really exciting company to work for. And I remember her saying that to me back, it was someone else previous to Halima. And I was like, oh man, that feels good. It just feels good. You belong here. I think you can say that in a lot of different situations where people are uneasy and not quite sure how what their footing is. The other one is, yesterday I was explaining to an EA how to be more proactive about the next step in her career, because she's newer. She just was going from reactive to proactive, and we're working on that. And I talked about basically rocks versus pebbles. So she puts the rocks in first, right? And then the pebbles will fall where they lay. So even in a calendar, from a like purely calendar perspective, I was like, well, have you spent, this year of 2023, have you put all the big rocks in the calendars, like all the things that are going to happen, all the all hands that you're going to do quarterly, all of the big events that will affect our company? And she's like, oh no. I'm like, oh yeah, you need to put the big rocks in, right? And then the pebbles can be filled in around the big rocks. So think about what your big rocks are, whether it's, virtually a calendar or it's your personal goals. What are your big rocks? Is it getting back to doing yoga? Is it making a goal that you want to take a walk every lunch, or you want to get in touch with someone you haven't seen in years? Like, figure out your big rocks.
And I love it. Also dealing with like the anxiety of like you mentioned, being new or a new situation or something. When we get nervous, we hold our breath. So the first thing you can do to reset is always, I did it right before. I don't know if you guys saw me doing this right before we started this, but like before I move between things I do during the day, I try to stop for like 10 seconds and take like 2 deep breaths, because it's a really good reset to be like, so if you start to feel that, oh, I have to do this, or I'm nervous about this, or I'm not sure, stop for a second. And before you even start the like confidence building of talking to yourself, take 2 deep breaths. That's going to reset your system so that then you actually can calm down.
Yeah. And I want to double click on a couple of things that both of you mentioned, around organization and prep. Practice makes perfect. So it's not only just, do you have an agenda prepared? We're going to go click on some of these Q&A questions in a minute, but one person was asking about like confidence around public speaking, and really just speaking up in general. It's really hard for people, right? So unless you're in a role where all you do all day, every day is like talk externally to clients or, give big speeches, like it's something that it's a learned skill, right? That you have to constantly exercise like a muscle. And so it's not just about like writing down and making sure you have an agenda, but role play it with yourself in the mirror. For me, a lot of stuff that I'm not confident in, conversations I have to have with team members or conversations I have to have with clients, I'm lucky that I have a great co-founder who I'm like, let's get on the phone. Like I share my outline of my talking points and things I want to say. And then I role play it with him. And then I ask for real-time feedback. And I said, what do you think? Like, should I change any wording here? Right? Like I'm so over prepared when I go and have like major conversations that then once I have one of those under my belt, when I have to have conversations that are more ad hoc that I'm not used to, I have a history now of experience doing it and I can riff on it a little bit, right? So certain things you can prepare for, but then once you have experience doing it, when something comes out of left field and you get asked a question randomly in a meeting, like you can use that sort of like bank of experience or like that confidence you have from the previous conversation you had that went really well to be able to have the confidence to speak up.
And think about it too in preparation, like how you'd prepare for anything else. How do you prepare to go on a trip? You have to pack your bag. You have to look at the weather. Okay, well, something changes. Like, do you have a backup plan if it rains that day? Like, it should be the exact same with work, that like you get to the airport, your flight's delayed. Okay, well, do you have snacks? Did you prepare snacks for your family, for yourself, whatever it is? Like all of it, most things should be able to have like a main plan. Let's call it your P0, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
And then like, your plan B or your plan C, and they don't have to be all written out and detailed, but generally things that you can fall back on, like you said, to be able to riff.
I was just talking with an EA friend who, I haven't seen in a while, and she got married, and we said, how's the wedding? She got married in Palm Springs, and we had seen on Instagram that it was raining and that things weren't necessarily, as she had ideally planned her wedding. But her story last night was so cool. She's like, well, I'm an EA, so of course I bought beautiful clear umbrellas for the whole wedding party, just in case there was like a 30% chance of rain, which to her meant it will rain, right? Because 30 is high for an EA. The wedding planner then came in to tell her that there was a sandstorm happening coming up onto the property. So of course, the wedding planner has to be basically an EA as well. A wedding planner knows the 3 different situations that could happen based on the destination and how to pivot. And I was so impressed by the story of how everything worked out. They wound up getting 20 minutes where they could do the ceremony outside. They held the umbrella over each other as they did their vows, and they were able to just pivot and kind of iterate on, okay, well, this didn't work out, but we still have this. Mm-hmm. So that's a really good example of how everybody thought a few steps ahead, and they were really able to have an amazing day. So in the end, it rained a little, it sandstormed a little, and she still had an amazing wedding. She said it was the best day of her life.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Yeah. There's a couple of questions that came in here that sort of lead into some of these other topics that I know we wanted to chat on. And so one of them was around like, how do you get over allowing someone to affect your confidence? So basically being intimidated by someone. So they say, I'm very confident with one of my executives and my feedback and voice has taken me so far with her, but I'm completely tongue-tied with my CEO. So he isn't going to appreciate my value until I feel more confident around him and give him my thoughts, opinions, insights in an intelligent way. So curious to hear from the two of you how you tackle that. And by the way, the person who shared this, like, I experience that all the time. There are certain people I'm very, very comfortable and confident talking to. And then, I don't know, for some reason in my own head, I like psych myself out. Like I think for me, like when I go to like networking events, if I know there's like a very specific like topic or subject, I'm very comfortable talking to people and approaching them about it. But if I go to like a party, like a social gathering where there's like people there, like, and it's not like a specific topic, I'm like, how do I like walk up and approach and start talking to somebody about something where there's like not an agenda? I get nervous about that. Like how do I approach somebody and just be like, hey, I'm Meagan, like what do you talk to them about? So I'm curious to hear from the two of you.
I am always used to having like my thing is like difficult people. So no offense to anyone I've worked for, but they're not the easiest people to support, C-level executives, period. Not because they're mean or bad people, but because they can be they have very little time to listen to you. So what you have to present to them needs to be concise and very clearly articulated. And I always tell people, I think about when I put it in writing, because I work in Slack, which is a written form, it's a written way of writing and working all day long. Everything goes in writing. So I have to think about, I pretend that I am paying by the word to put my words down in Slack. And I do not use more words than is needed to convey an idea. And I think that is one way to build confidence, is to show that you can be concise, that you respect their time. And that's in writing, and the same goes for presenting. So when I'm going to walk up to my boss in the old days, I would not appear as though I had run to the event. I would, like Taylor said, take 2 deep breaths, compose yourself, and present. What I've been saying lately is like soft eyes, like Jackson Galaxy, the cat whisperer. He will talk extensively about making soft eyes at cats, which are notoriously temperamental, much like executives can be. You have to show, and actually really good advice I got recently was like, don't run around an event. It makes people think there's a fire, there's a problem. You always have to maintain your composure and your calm. So, preparing yourself physically and mentally before having that conversation is key. And then recognizing that they're not going to give you exactly what you want. They're not your mom or your best friend, and they're not there to congratulate you on this, information you're sharing with them. You have to have a bit of a thick skin to deal with recognizing that you may not get the praise that you would like, that you will get from other people. And then finding those little wins on your team cross-functionally from your personal life, allowing there to be, you have to find your self-worth and your value in knowing that you're really good at it, regardless of how other people are responding to you.
Yeah. I think one thing you mentioned that kind of makes me think about this for execs is like, kind of how we talked about like these micro habits to build your own confidence. It's the same way of like, do micro things with the CEO. Like you don't need to like come in and wow them with this like big idea or this like, major comment in like a meeting with a bunch of other execs. It's little things. It's like, one Slack message. It's, acknowledging or noticing one thing and mentioning it to them. Like it's little things. I was chatting with somebody the other day who like is a very introverted individual. And so I try to meet him where he is. And I literally said to him, because he's in the crypto industry and is in the periphery of this FTX stuff that's going on. And something came up and he's like, you could have asked me about that. And I said, I can tell that this whole situation is making you uncomfortable. So like, I'll just put it out there, like, yeah, I'm interested, but when you're ready to talk about it, you can come to me. And I think that really like disarmed him. And he's like, I really appreciate that you even noticed that. So you don't like, it doesn't have to be something revolutionary. Like if you notice something with your exec, like they're regularly, like the CEO is like regularly late for a meeting, you can even just say, hey, like I noticed that you tend to be 5 minutes late pretty consistently. Like, can I shorten your previous meetings like by 5 minutes so that you always have that buffer time, or like make little suggestions, and you're going to start opening that wall and that like communication back and forth with them to have them build trust and perhaps like start to open up to you, and it just becomes a little bit less jarring.
And I think too, so my background is in finance and private equity, hedge funds. So I'm used to like this difficult personality all the time, and like the coming at you, the questions, like all of that. And I think that the first thing is you need to step back and ask yourself, why are you intimidated by this person? Is it their role? Is it because just because somebody's the CEO does not mean they're the smartest person in the company. We've all learned that, right? So it's like, is it because you believe they're smarter than you? Is it because you believe that they're in a higher position of power, which most likely they are, right? Like, but what is it? And then think about that for a second. Like, okay, well, are you intimidated by someone at a director level? Or, I mean, are you intimidated by them? No. Okay. Because you consider yourself to be better at this or smarter at this. Well, you're better at a lot of things probably than the CEO. So I think that and it doesn't have to be the CEO, but your executive, your person who's in a higher position than that. So I think thinking about, okay, wait, why do I feel intimidated? And then thinking, okay, I know one person mentioned this in the chat specifically, like there's questions and then questions that they don't feel like they can answer. And then they're put on this reactive kind of spot. Like, again, take a deep breath, don't be reactive and flustered. And how you do that this is how I learned to do it, was I just had one phrase that I always repeated back, because at one point I was getting a lot of questions on things and I would repeat back like a quick off the cuff answer, which half the time wasn't correct. So I learned to stop doing that and to start saying, and then that looks worse. You're giving them incorrect information. Then they second guess whether you are either know it or you're good at it. Stop and say, I'm not sure on that. I'm going to have to check and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like, have a phrase that's like, let me check so that I can make sure I'm 100% correct. Whatever you need to say so that you can take a step back. Ask yourself again, what was the exact question they asked? You don't want to provide them. I think we ramble, right? So it's like, they ask about, is the meeting on? Well, I talked to Steve and Steve said that he may be able to make it, but he might be traveling. And if his plane doesn't matter, none of that stuff matters. He wants to know, is the meeting on? So that's when you have to step back and ask yourself, what was the question? How do I answer it best? And how do I confirm this answer is correct so that you're not reactive? The other like great thing about being in any like interpersonal kind of situation is exactly like Meagan was talking about. You don't have to, if you want to connect with someone and you're CEO, right? You have to set yourself, or your executive, your person, you have to set yourself apart. So looking at what are things that they put time into that they like I had a CEO who had a massive art collection. There was always stuff that was going on in the New York Post, whatever, with talking about art and these gallery openings. And he would reference them, I would hear in phone calls to other people. And so I started downloading the New York Post and just like reading the headlines so that when he said something, I could be like, oh my gosh, I saw that Damien Hirst is going to be in this. That's amazing. Like, and then all of a sudden he's like, do you like art? And I'm like, oh, I kind of like, and then you just set yourself apart with that personal connection. So it could be sports, it could be their kids, dogs, art, anything that you can think of to just generate a little bit of personal connection.
I totally agree with that. And plus one to what Taylor said. So when I support our CTO, right? So when I have to cover someone else who supports another C-level, the number one thing I have to say when doing so is, I don't know, let me find out. I mean, I don't have a reference of why a meeting is on someone's calendar if I don't support them. That, that week I suddenly am supporting them. I need to go dig into why that meeting's there, what the briefing doc, where things exist. But the answer at that moment is just, I don't know, but I will find out and I will circle back, because they also want to know that you're going to close the loop for them and get back to them.
Yeah.
I was also going to mention something. People who lack confidence as an EA specifically, and chief of staff, I would say, one thing to just recognize is your executives' direct reports are your direct peers. So when I am in a team meeting with Cal and our whole executive team, these are my peers. The admin team are also my peers, but these are the people I identify with as my peers. And I think recognizing that you're already sitting at the table and being, there's definitely a time to be quiet. There's definitely a time to let the executive team have discussions about things. But when you know something, and we often know things because I happen to have my eyes everywhere in Slack, in every channel, there is always an opportunity to, when appropriate, raise your hand and offer a different perspective or additional information, because you do have quite a bit of insight to share.
And when you're going to do that, make sure that you do know what you're talking about.
Yes.
To say something about everything. No one likes that person in a meeting, right? Like they just don't, though. You don't want to be that person that has to have the last word on each. Pick one thing one lane that you feel passionate about or that you're good at, that you can constantly, because sometimes like Shelley, you're incredible, but like keeping an eye on every channel in Slack, like sometimes that's not actually possible. So
yes.
Pick one thing that you can focus on. Maybe it's your all hands.
Shelley's superpower.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I
it's
feel
a
like
joke
that's
at
not
work.
something like I can do, but I feel like, okay, if I know that I'm gonna focus on the all hands, then I know, is the agenda ready? Is everybody attending? Is it always like those little, pick one thing and that's what you can kind of become an expert on. And then you can build your expert repertoire, but starting with something that you can have an opinion on is a helpful way to like look at what's tangibly what you can actually do, but also making sure that when you do speak, you do have something to say. Commenting, the people that like take off the space bar on Zoom and are like, like that's not helpful. We don't need that. We need people saying like, hey, can I ask a clarifying question on this? That's interest, not like unmuting yourself to acknowledge a comment someone made.
Those people go to the same place in my world where it's the same as the people who write thanks in an email response. There's like a 7 layers of hell and they live in that layer.
No, it's so true though. It's like, if you're going to say something, make sure you have a point, make sure that you have something that's valid. And how do you decide that? Well, you can try it a couple different times and look at everyone else's reaction in the room. Sometimes we all say things that just totally fall flat. And it always makes me laugh because it's like that weird embarrassment of like, okay, clearly no one agreed with me on but then test that, right? Like, what's the office culture? What's the company culture, the call culture even of this? And then how do you read that intuitively and then make good input?
Yeah.
A coworker previously took Toastmasters too, someone who was in sales and they were working on their confidence and learning how to speak in public. They wound up getting really heavily involved in Toastmasters. I would also recommend you take a theater class if you have any interest in theater, like building your ability to use your voice in a unique way and to speak to I always say, speak to the person in the back of the theater, right, when you're presenting. And I also tell people Zoom does not convey how animated you really are. You have to actually like amplify by about 30%, I feel like, to get the conveyance of how excited I am. You know, the presence on Zoom is just not like being in a room. So you have to go more. When I'm coaching people for our all hands, I tell people you're going to have to give it 30% more at least enthusiasm and effort than you think you have.
And make sure it's authentic.
Yeah.
Which sounds strange, like okay, well, how do I amp it up if I'm an introverted person? Maybe for you, amping it up is nodding, is, smiling, is doing something. It doesn't have to be like, if you're not a person that's really outspoken, you don't have to be doing crazy outspoken things, because people are going to be like, okay, what happened to her? She drank way too much coffee this morning, like she's about to launch off the earth. That's not what we're talking about. It's about being authentic to yourself and raising that to the point that you can, so that other people feel emotionally connected to you.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to, because we have about 10 minutes left, and there's some really good questions and just comments in the Q&A that I think are worth acknowledging, because it kind of goes around with like, the topics in general. So one person said, talking about like things you can do to build confidence, that she at the end of every week writes down and records accomplishments so that she can share those things in her annual review. And one thing that I did, and I've encouraged every single person I've ever worked with or like had the opportunity to manage or mentor, is I create an awesomeness, like it's called the awesomeness folder in my email. It could be like a Slack channel or whatever it is. I even had like back in the day when I worked at Carlton, we used to have these like kudos cards where you could like literally handwrite like a nice acknowledgement to somebody. I save all of that stuff. Every like good feedback I get from a client, a candidate, a team member, it gets foldered in my awesomeness folder. And that way, when I was having an annual review, I would look back at it and I'd come prepared with like, here are all the things that I accomplished, right? If I was leaving to go interview for another company, like I had all of these examples. And so that's a really good way to build up confidence, because it's so easy, I think, to remember when things go wrong, but it's really, really hard to remember when things go right. And so having like a way of remembering that kind of stuff, I think, is super important.
Be like end of the week, end of the day, like it doesn't have to, it could be into the month, into the quarter. It doesn't have to be something that creates like a big ask from you. It could just be like a quick note that you have on your phone that's like, oh, this went well,
Yeah.
I have a Google Doc, because we do like a quarterly review, and I just have this Google Doc that has different topics about things I've accomplished, projects I've managed, anything that I've affected, so that I can remember like, what did I do this quarter, and why do I deserve a raise, and why am I doing okay, right? Like whatever works for you. I keep my calendar really detailed, so I can actually go through the last quarter's calendar and say like, oh, these are the projects I worked on. It took this number of hours even to accomplish this project.
Yeah, that's a really good reflection. Now, one thing somebody said is, I think that defensiveness can be one of the big hindrances of being a good, confident leader, since good leaders are always able to admit their mistakes. What's a good technique to accept criticism well while not letting it affect your confidence? Oh, I love this question.
Such a good one on this one.
Yeah,
Okay, people are going to give you criticism whether you ask for it or whether you don't ask for it, right? Like, and so I think that first, when someone gives you criticism, you need to it's just like when you ask other people for an opinion, you need to step back and say, do I respect this person? Do I like, is this person someone that I would want to be in their shoes at work? Do I respect them? Because all criticism is not the same. It has to come from a source that you feel like this, and you have to ask yourself, is this good spirited or bad spirited? If it's bad spirited, you get rid of it immediately. Should be like a chart. You break down criticism. Then when you have good criticism, you ask, or criticism that's not coming from a bad place, you ask someone you ask your head, is this someone that I trust, that I envy with work professionally, that I respect? And then that's how you break down that criticism. And maybe you don't like the person. Maybe they're just not a very nice person, but they're a really great employee worker. They're good at what they do. Try to take the emotional piece out of it and say, okay, this person's really good and they've gotten to this level. And then possibly inquire more about it with them if you're comfortable. Say like, you mentioned this. You're right. I think I could really use to improve that. How did you manage to do that? How do you find that balance? Like, engaging them in it creates a positive turn of events versus a negative, to be like, yeah, thanks. Because then they feel brushed off. They may not give you criticism again. Engaging, but also don't take criticism from people that you don't respect, that you don't think are valid. Just like you don't ask, your like really chaotic friend how they're like getting things done. No, that's not where you should be getting advice from. So I think you have to step back and say, first off, qualified, is it good?
Totally agree with all of that. Absolutely. It's when I have gotten feedback from people who I don't respect, it's like, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath, pivot, right? Keep going, whatever you need.
Falls off the side of the earth at that point, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, we don't think about it again. And then I shouldn't say side of the earth because I want to confirm I believe the earth is round, but
it's good. We're all in the same group then.
Yeah.
I think feedback too is like a lot less jarring when you get it more often. And so I'm always, I mean, literally after every time we do a webinar, I call, you know, Taylor or Shelley or whoever is, and I'm like, so what could I have done better? You know, like constantly ask people who you're working with or that are friends with you or family members, like every little thing. Like the way I look at it is like, I'm a sculptor being constantly chiseled away at and created, right? Like I am not the final person that I'm going to be for the rest of my life. Every single day, every action that I do, every project that I work on, every interaction I have is going to mold me as a human being to ideally be a better human being, right? And so if you come from this place of like constantly learning, constantly growing, ask people whose opinions you value, that you know are going to come from, like Taylor said, is it coming from a place of like love and respect, or is this person like having a really bad day and just wants to tear everybody else down to make themselves feel better about themselves, right?
And that totally goes with executives where they are dealing with something incredibly stressful for their company, and they may come at you in a way that doesn't seem aligned with the way you deserve to be treated that moment. And truthfully, you should not be taking abuse at work for any length of time, but just recognizing like where people are coming from before you approach them, and perhaps when to approach them appropriately too, and with what information.
And it may have nothing to do with you. That's another like key thing I think in all of this is just saying like, okay, wait, I've just seen this person rip apart the last 3 people they've spoken to. Do I think it has to do with me, or do I think this is, you know, this is a user issue for them? So it's like, I think that you have to ask yourself, and also if you don't understand the criticism, or you don't believe the criticism is like, maybe you could apply, maybe you couldn't, ask this person questions. Wait, why do you do it that way? Or why do you suggest I should do it that way? You know, because the curiosity component is like that sculpture and building that knowledge to like get all of it. And remember that other people have ways that they do things, and that doesn't mean you have to do them that way, but maybe you could glean one thing that's like, you know, try to look at it as like, what's one thing I respect about this person, or one thing that they do really well that I could actually learn, because that makes you a lot more adaptable and open to listening.
Yeah, it's like I always say, I'm a half-baked cookie. So some people like half-baked cookies. Maybe I'm good for some people right now. But like, it's important to recognize.
Pause for a second.
Yeah. So I just said we're not fully baked, and anybody who wakes up in the morning and thinks they are a fully baked cookie is in for some disappointment, because we have so much room to grow until the day we're not here.
And wouldn't it be such a shame to be stagnant in your own life?
Yes.
Like we should always be improving and learning and growing and asking questions. And that's crucial to development, whether it's in your personal life and relationships and work with your peers. So I think that that's something that you should encourage, and encourage other people to. If you manage other people, if they're, ask them, you know, how do you think I performed at that? What could I do better? Like Meagan leads this, but she does always ask us after, like, hey, what do you guys think of this? That's important, because it creates this peer and this collaboration that's necessary, especially in the virtual world that we're in right now.
Yeah, love that. So last question, because we're wrapping up. So I'm curious to know for you guys, like, how have you specifically helped EAs that you coach build confidence? Like, what are some specific examples or use cases of things that you've done for your clients?
So my first thought is, I had someone who was bilingual, and they felt like they lacked confidence in their language skills in America. And I was interested to hear that. And I said, I don't think you realize you actually have a superpower that most people don't have, which is you speak 2 languages, not just 1, but 2. And so I think you need to turn it around, the way you think about things, and recognize like you actually have more powers in more places than a lot of folks at your work. And you can work on if you're concerned about English language skills, you can work on those, but other people are not going to be able to judge you for that. You need to, if you are feeling that, or you're getting actual like direct, you know, feedback on it, just remind them that you are here, and you are already capable of speaking fully in your native tongue. So like, to me, you're like superpower. I also think the preparation is the absolute number one thing when it comes to building confidence. I cannot say that enough. And that goes for everything. Being prepared mentally, preparing yourself with a vision and what you want to focus on. When my executive says, what does this mean? Or what is this? I already have the next 2 questions they're going to ask ready and the answers ready. So I never just say like, oh, no, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about the other contingency planning, right? So
And
you
they're
need to
gonna
be prepared.
consistent. Your executive is going to do that over and over again. So
Always.
figure out what those questions are, be prepared with them.
Yeah, see
Sorry,
the
Shelley,
patterns.
you off
See
there.
the patterns.
Yeah.
I think for me, really quick, when I look at confidence, I'm a systematic person. I like to break things down, right? So it's like, are you not confident in the work, or are you not confident in yourself? And even though those tie together, okay, if you're not confident in the work, that looks like a different plan, right? That is like looking at, you don't do presentations well, we take a training on presentations. You don't work on Excel sheets, you don't know how to balance a budget. Like, those are skills that, okay, we learn. Personally, then those are what we're talking about here. To wrap it back up, like all of the small things that you do to create confidence, whether that's in learning how to speak directly, whether that's in asserting your boundaries and building off of that until you have a foundation where both are balanced, because most of the time they're both things.
I totally agree. Your personal life will leak into your work life and vice versa. So balancing both sides is essential.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Well, thank you both so much for doing this super important topic. I'm so glad that I had both of you here. And like I said, both of you have played a really big part in helping build even my own confidence. And so I'm so glad we were able to share this with our community. For those of you who joined us today, we're going to go ahead and share this video with you in our recording so you can watch it again. And if you're interested in all in working with Taylor or Shelley as coaches, they are both available to take on new clients. So thanks, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.